Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you to ABARES and the organisers. It's a really exciting time for horticulture and fresh produce specifically, so it's a good opportunity for us to discuss some of the opportunities and maybe some of the challenges, which no doubt will come up in question time. So across the four speakers, we've got a range of perspectives, so what I'll probably do is provide very high-level perspective, and some of my colleagues will probably provide very practical perspective on some of the issues. So what I propose to cover is who works in fresh produce, what are the opportunities, what are employers saying, what are the immediate opportunities, and then what are the implications for government and industry. So worthwhile just giving a quick background on the Fresh Produce Alliance, because it'll help to inform where my comments are coming from. So the Fresh Produce Alliance is a membership of 14 companies which represent about half the turnover in fruit and vegetables in Australia. They work with 1,500 growers in supplying that produce. They account for about a third of exports, but importantly to what we're speaking to today, across the 14 companies, they employ about 22,000 people. And depending on who you speak to, employment is probably around 80 to 88,000 people in fresh produce. So when we start talking about fresh produce, often what we think about immediately is production, but I thought we wouldn't end with the broad opportunities in fresh produce. We'd start with the broad opportunities. So in terms of my background, I grew up in North Queensland, picked and packed mangoes, capsicums and melons and that sort of thing. And maybe that experience didn't actually suggest to me that I had a long career in fruit and vegetables. But what I did do is took up a career in agriculture, went to the Department of Agriculture in Canberra, worked on international trade agreements, moved to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Food and Grocery Council, and ended up at Hort Innovation, the research and development organisation for horticulture, and now working with fresh produce companies. And for me, my background and career and where I'm now working is probably a good example of how perhaps we don't think about roles and opportunities in fresh produce immediately. We always think of picking and packing. So with that, it's worthwhile thinking about as fresh produce, as fruit and vegetable industry in particular continues to grow, companies are hiring consumer analysts. Companies are hiring more and more marketing people to sell the produce. People are hiring robotics expertise. Agronomy is expanding as an area. So there's a long list there, obviously, and those roles aren't something that we immediately think of, not just within companies, but also more broadly in the supply chain. So whether that's in a services company, whether that's in a retailer, whether that's in an R&D body. So there's a whole range of opportunities, and I wanted to start there to flag that it's not just about what happens in the field, because that produce has got to be sold more. And importantly for fruit and vegetables in particular, meat, dairy and grains have had huge expansions over the last 20 to 30 years. But it's fair to say that horticulture broadly hasn't really had that production increase and then that export increase. So we're looking at industry where there are going to be more and more opportunities. In terms of factors affecting employment in fresh produce, as I mentioned, the 14 companies, we've got pulled a group together of the HR general managers of those 14 companies and had a conversation around what are the factors affecting employment and what do we need to recognise and then work with and then talk about careers to young people and people wanting to work in the industry. So the nature of the work, it's often physical work. And some people don't like physical work, but some people love being outside. And so that's a really key factor. Variable weather conditions, it doesn't matter what day people are out in the paddock doing the work. The work periods and location often dependent on products being harvested. And you'll see in the press there's often conversations around labour and employment for fruit and vegetables, but obviously fruit in particular is a very seasonal product. It's practical that the fruit comes on at a period of time and it needs to be picked. It's not a manufacturing process. We're not working with steel, we're working with fruit and vegetables which are perishable. The nature of the locations, often remote. The 14 companies have more than 100 production locations across Australia, but that's for purpose again. There's different growing regions to spread risk, extend seasons, but it does create challenges in terms of getting people to where the work is, housing them, and making sure that they're well looked after. In terms of some of the other end of the spectrum is around metropolitan. There's a number of farmers and growers which are around capital cities. And some of the challenges that they face are very different to someone in a remote location. You're not trying to draw people out to a remote location. You're trying to say to people in a metropolitan area, hey, why don't you, come out and work on vegetables, pick some fruit. As I say, go into a marketing team, think about the opportunities much more broadly than just than picking and packing. So these are some of the practical things that, people are working through. But then it leads, obviously, to the immediate opportunities. And number one is probably no surprise to anyone. It's very labour intensive, horticulture, which has been a challenge, but also a huge opportunity. Horticulture is a key regional player. It underpins regional communities, and that's something that we haven't celebrated enough, the role of fresh produce in the regions, supporting regional communities. If we move through then to technical expertise, as I mentioned before, farm management, agronomy, irrigation, trade skills, machinery operations, these are all skill sets that are in high demand, often in lower numbers than, say, 22,000 people needed at different times for harvest. But the key roles and key spine or skeletons, if you like, within a business, that without those skill sets, it's very difficult to function and very difficult to be efficient and effective, and very difficult to grow. So while the numbers of overall people might be lower, those skill sets are as valuable as anyone else in that business. In terms of middle management, some of these conversations are had across agriculture. It's not unique to horticulture, but the importance of bringing up people into middle management roles, people that can take on responsibility for a business operation or a marketing operation, and really drive a business. And I think at least within our members, there is a real focus on how do we bring people into the industry, how do we keep them. It's focused on graduate programs, traineeships, things which are common across other parts of the sector and other parts of agriculture, which perhaps haven't been embedded in horticulture and fresh produce in the past. So these, again, probably no surprise, but these are some of the key factors. And I'm happy to share this brief, so if you want a copy of this, we've got a brief we can share later. In terms of the implications, there's often a real focus on, what's the role of government? Government's got to fix this for us, government's got to drive the change. One of the key things from my mind is, in horticulture, as it continues to grow, is companies are taking on more responsibility and engaging in a way that expands their business and then says to government, okay, we've met our requirements and working with our workforce, but here's some gaps, which are not only common to me, but also common across the industry. And in moving towards the 100 billion target, here are some things that we need to do. So in terms of industry and harvest, need continued expansion of a permanent local workforce, creating opportunities for young Australians, improving practices and reputation, and delivering practical solutions. So certainly over the last 12 months, companies have committed to treating people well, improving work practices and standards, and really driving forward that area of their business. In terms of the opportunity for government, expansion of the seasonal worker program and the working holiday maker program in particular, but also continued access to backpackers. And, there's been a conversation around agriculture visas and, whether that gets up or not. But I suppose the key thing for horticulture is, because of the diversity, even between fruit and vegetables, let alone nuts and nursery and garden, there is a range of requirements. There are a range of unique requirements for fruit as compared to vegetables. And so we need policy approaches which recognise those differences and allow businesses to operate efficiently and effective within a government policy. Perhaps a single policy or program is not going to fix, it's not going to be a magic bullet to some of the challenges that are focused. In terms of technical expertise, as I mentioned, graduate programs, on-the-job training and encouraging more diversity within employment programs So you see a number of companies expanding their remit on who they're employing and where and why. Really exciting thing for me is providing opportunities for young people to get into fruit and vegetable industry in the regions where they live and providing those skilled pathways. So that's becoming more and more of a focus. And again, what is the role of a company in doing that that's operating in a region? And then where there's a gap or a fundamental underpinning in terms of the training, how does government or the education system work with companies to not take it over, but support companies to train those people, keep them in their business or keep them in the industry. And perhaps the way we've been thinking about it is someone goes off and get educated and then comes back. Maybe we need to think about or continue to expand that integration of skills and on-the-job work. Technical expertise, again, in terms of government, skills and training programs, immigration program, but there must be an alignment between the government policy and the business requirements. There's no benefit to industry in creating a program which is misaligned to a business requirement. We really need to be quite practical. Again, in middle management, some of the exciting things are a real focus on developing leaders, and particularly young people in regions, as I mentioned, and not only within the business, but industry leaders to step forward and drive the industry, not just individual businesses. So fruit and vegetable industry in particular, the 14 companies had set a goal of expanding to $20 billion by 2030. That'll be driven by an increase in exports, particularly in fruit, but also in vegetables. Some of those opportunities in the expansion in business operations, both within companies and then across regions, there's going to be some fantastic opportunities for people to start a career, pick up some skills, and then grow with a business, grow with an industry, grow with a sector, move between companies. So that's my introduction. As I said, fairly high level, but one of the key things as well is there's lots of challenges, which no doubt we'll get to in questions, but the opportunities are significant in the industry, and it's one of the fastest growing, expanding industries within horticulture. We've got to remain focused on the opportunities and solving the challenges, solving the problems, rather than kind of throwing our hands in the air and saying we can't fix it. So it's my contribution. I'll leave it to the others. Thank you.